Are you wanting to level up your crochet game a little bit and take some of your garments from a little more handmade looking to a little bit more high end? Because I am going to break down some different aspects of garments that we can apply to crochet to make them a little more high end. Let's get into it. I am taking a page out of my friend Litza's book over at Coco's Crochet, and I have got my clipboard so I do not miss anything. I am going to talk fast and get through this because I've got a lot I do want to cover today. Like, what makes a garment feel really high end? I am not in any way saying you have to spend a lot of money on yarn or that you have to do any certain things. There is a time and a place for everything, and this isn't to judge other projects. I happen to use a lot of acrylic and other synthetic yarns and love them, so I am in no way saying don't use them. But we want to kind of look a little bit closer at things that make a piece look a little bit higher or lower in quality. We are going to start out with 3 different factors here. We are going to cover the fiber, the fit, and the colors. So let's start out with fiber being the most obvious. And I want to say that I love yarn. I love all types of yarn. I love acrylic yarn. I love Super Saver. I also love some nice high-end yarns as well. So we are not judging any yarns here, and we are not saying not to use any certain yarns. But what we are going to talk about is the right applications to use some of those yarns. So one of the first things with your fiber, and these are in no particular order, but one of the first things that I want to cover is going to be the sheen of your yarn. You will find that certain fabrics and certain garments have more or less of a sheen. Oftentimes, something with just a little bit more sheen does come off a little more high end than something rather dull. I've got a little bit of an example here. So I have got some Crafter's Secret cotton, and this is just 100% cotton. It does not go into a lot more details than that. And this is the color brown. So it is just fine. I mean, it's definitely a utility cotton, but you can see how it is, even though it's definitely a nice saturated color, it is dull. Where here I have this Bergère yarn, and it is a cotton sateen. This is the color khaki. It's like definitely like a goldish color. And while this is cotton, this is mercerized cotton. And you can see it definitely has a nice sheen to it. And of course, this little bit of cotton, it did cost me a bit more than this cotton, and there's a lot less here. But you can definitely tell, looking at the 2 of these, you've got one that sheen on there definitely makes it look much more high end. So that's the first thing I want you to consider if you are picking out a couple different yarns that might be pretty close in consistency with color and price and yardage and all that. A little bit nicer fiber, a little bit nicer fabric is going to have a little bit more of a sheen than a duller one that might look a little bit more cheaper on your finished project. The next factor when it comes to your fiber looking cheap or high end is going to have to do with whether or not it pills easily. So once in a while you see a yarn, and before you even buy it when it's in the store, if it's been handled a little bit rough, you can already see like a little bit of like fluffiness and some pilling happening. I would encourage you that if you're going to the store and starting from scratch on a project and you're going to be buying yarn for it, that there are a lot of options out there that are low pill or some that claim to be no pill acrylics. And you might spend a little bit more per skein of it, but in the long run, going with a low pill yarn will definitely help in your fiber, in your fabric, look a little bit more high end. This is 100% low pill acrylic that I had picked up a couple years ago on clearance. I haven't really used these in a project, and I haven't really tried to because I kind of like how they are behind me here. But knowing that I have this option means it's going to be a little bit more durable, and I'm not going to have to put as much effort into that fabric helping it keep nice. Let me put this away. You can also combat this in the way you wash your garments and not putting them in the dryer. I know I have also seen the little contraptions. They're usually battery operated, and they kind of shave your garment. You shave your sweater a little bit and take off some of those little pills on there. I think a lot of times they might just be called a sweater shaver. But by doing those things, you know, hand washing, not putting in the dryer, and using a shaver when you need to will help keep the pills away. But by selecting a low pill yarn to begin with is going to be a way to help keep that garment looking a little more high end. And kind of going along with that texture, I want to touch on yarns that have a halo versus non-halo yarns. As with all of these things, you want to go with your preference, but when we think of, you know, beautiful Angora sweaters, things like that, you know, generally speaking, like those high-end luxury yarns do have a halo on them. That's why you see, like, I know knitters a lot of times pair like a mohair yarn with another yarn, just to get a little bit of that fuzzy halo on their garment. And that is a great way to help make your garment look a little more high-end, is by using a yarn with a halo. And you can find budget-friendly options and alternatives that are synthetic if you're not wanting to invest in, you know, mohair or something like that. Another thing I want to bring up in the same category of fiber is going to be the size of the yarn. Now, a lot of times when we see something that is a luxury piece, it might have a much smaller size to the yarn. I think a lot of times, you know, we as crocheters think of this about, you know, like scarves and shawls, and how they have that real fine yarn in there and just makes like a beautiful pattern. But when you also think about like big chunky blankets and cardigans that might use a real nice thick yarn like this, also feel very high end. As much as I absolutely love 4-weight worsted weight yarn, sometimes it has a very average look to it. And like I said, I love it. I am not knocking it at all, but the reality is, you know, oftentimes your stitches, they just look kind of average with average 4-weight yarn. So it is something to think about, and depending on the type of piece it is, like for something like this that's very, very whimsical, I really don't think it matters, because like I said, it is more of a whimsical piece and it isn't really designed to look super high end. It's just supposed to be fun. Fibers that are thinner weight or chunky can definitely increase the appearance or the, I mean, I don't want to say an illusion, because you could have a very nice, expensive 4-weight yarn that is in reality very, very nice, much more expensive than something that could be thinner. I think in people's mind, when you go to a store and you're looking, you know, if you're looking at sweaters in the store, sometimes the ones that are a little bit cheaper, a little bit more mass produced, do have a little bit larger, looser stitches, and the fiber itself is a little bit bigger. So even though that one's really more about perception, it can be a contributing factor that you might want to think about when deciding what yarn and what pattern you're using to make it look more high end. And the last thing with fiber that I'm mentioning today in this video is going to be how it feels on your skin. And the reason I say this is because, in theory, when you have a high-end piece that's constructed well, generally speaking, you're not going to be fidgeting with it. If you have a piece where, you know, where you've seamed together, might be real thick and scratchy and kind of digging in, or, you know, it is bunching up in the armpit and you're tugging on it, those are all things that are going to give other people the impression that that garment is not high end, because high end pieces generally do not require a lot of fidgeting and pulling on, which is going to move us right into the fit of the item you're making and how if that fit seems homemade or high-end. And let me just say, when I am using the term homemade, I don't mean that in any, how should I say this? I grew up with a grandma that was amazing. When we would go shopping, there'd be something in the store and she would say, don't buy that. I can make that. And generally speaking, she could. She was very good at sewing. And so I was very fortunate to be exposed to a lot of handmade garments that were made very well and that were made to my exact proportions and out of, everything I loved. So I don't want you to get the wrong idea that I don't like homemade garments or that I think they're bad, because that is not the truth at all. But I think that by using the word homemade versus high-end, gives you a better idea of what I mean by that. We can all picture something that just isn't quite where it needs to be. Like for me, that would be me doing like home DIYs and crafts. Like I see people do cute craft ideas, making wreaths and just signs and, wall art and all of this cute stuff. And when I go to make it just looks cheap. It doesn't look good. It looks like I tried and missed the mark. That's kind of how I'm using the term homemade here. And I think the main thing with picking out your yarn and dealing with the fit of the project is going to be using the correct yarn for the correct project. And to reiterate, I love some acrylic yarn, but it's not always going to be the right choice for the right job. If you are wanting a nice, beautiful drapey scarf, you are going to want to pick a yarn that is definitely quite a bit finer and made out of a fabric that is going to drape. You're not going to want a thick, stiff acrylic yarn that kind of, makes a giant triangle that hangs off your chest in a funny way. You want something that when it's on you and wrapped around you, you see the beautiful draping as it goes on. And there are definitely projects where I think a stiff acrylic yarn would be perfect. And that would be something that is designed to be more structured. If you want a very boxy looking cardigan, that's going to be great because it is going to hold up to the structure. You put those seams in there, they're going to be nice and firm. And there's a lot of reasons why you might want something structured. I think you can have very structured pieces that are also very high end. Like think about those Chanel, is it Chanel? The Chanel suits where it's like the boucle and, the textured, I don't know, I think like a Barbie might wear one. Point of that is it is a very structured piece. The jacket is very structured. The skirt is very structured. And that is a great way to use those thicker, stiffer yarns. You're just not going to want them on a piece that is designed to drape. Does this piece need to be something durable or something delicate? And that is part of the fit as well. If this is a real delicate piece, you're going to want a very delicate yarn. If it is a very durable piece, you're going to want a durable yarn because you want it to match up. You don't want a delicate yarn making your durable piece look flimsy and cheap. And it's like it's kind of the exact opposite of what I just talked about as far as the structure and the drapiness there. If you put a very fine yarn into a project that needs to be stiff, it is going to make it look cheap because it looks like it's just not holding up. Some fits are just more sophisticated than others, and we generally associate sophistication more with a high-end look. So like my vest from earlier and compare that with the Chanel suit, two different things, apples and oranges right there. So consider that if you're wanting to make a piece that looks high end. And the last thing I want to cover in this video, if you're wanting to level up your crochet garments and take them from a little less expensive to a little more expensive, is going to be the color. And that is a little bit of a touchy subject because we all have so many different preferences, and I don't in any way think like my color palette's better than your color palette. I am not saying that. Number one, you should wear what you feel good in. You should wear what you like. You should wear what looks good on you. So there's a lot of preference that goes into this. But that being said, we associate certain colors with certain things. Oftentimes, you will see more sophisticated pieces in neutral colors: black, gray, white, beige, camel. Just that neutral color palette tends to be associated with sophistication. Now, what if I talk about primary colors? Your Roy G. Bivs. A lot of times we associate those colors with small children. And that's not to say you can't like them or look fantastic in them, but they do tend to be associated as kids' colors. Same way with, certain pastels, pastel rainbow colors. A lot of times we think nursery, baby. And that's not to say you can't look absolutely beautiful in those or love them. And these are just hypotheticals. I know, like I said, everyone can wear whatever they want. If you're wanting a little bit of help, narrowing that down, you can just easily do a Pinterest search or something like that. Just type in sophisticated color palettes, sophisticated color palettes for women, anything like that, to kind of help jumpstart you a little bit on how you want to go. And while we're talking about this, let's talk a little bit about color saturation. Oftentimes, yarns that do have like a heavy saturation of pigment are going to look more high end than a very washed out, underpigmented. Now, I'm not saying pastels, that's something completely different. But when it almost looks as if the yarn and the fiber didn't really take all the dye, think about when you're looking at a pair of jeans and you have like a very dark denim and you see someone wearing them, with a nice jacket and maybe a pair of heels, and those dark denim jeans can become much, much dressier. Where if you look at a pair of jeans that are super faded out, very, very light blue, almost white, it tends to look much, much more casual, and it's much harder to dress that piece up. And it's kind of that same thing as that imagery as we're looking with a very saturated yarn compared to an unsaturated. One thing I would encourage you to do with your color is to use contrast sparingly if you're trying to achieve a high-end look. And there are definitely patterns out there that utilize contrast and really, they just own it. They own that contrast and it looks fabulous and it looks high-end. But if we're just adding in contrasting elements to our crochet pieces, it kind of can have the opposite effect we want, where when we start getting a lot of extra colors, if we start contrasting seams or contrasting trim, it can kind of bring down the perceived value of that piece and look a lot more handmade. I mean, to me, in my mind, that is how I used to kind of perceive crochet, because I was thinking of a lot of pieces that were made in my childhood in the 70s and 80s, where I feel like they were pretty heavy on the contrasting trims and just accenting those seams and things like that. And then another factor you want to take into consideration is going to be patterns and prints. So whether a piece is solid, whether or not you are using pattern, when I say pattern, I'm talking like a variegated or a striped yarn or a spotted or speckled. Just think about how that pattern will look. Sometimes the yarn looks absolutely stunning in the skein, but once you get it into the piece, it could be very, very busy or very overwhelming, or actually take away from the beauty of your stitches. It's just something you do want to be aware of, and maybe not have that pattern competing with your stitches, or have it be competing with you and your beauty. If it's something real bright and real busy, that can take away from that high-end look. So what's the takeaway? It's make whatever you want with whatever you want. for sure. Hopefully these questions can kind of just help you if you need a little bit of guidance or a little bit of reassurance or a little bit of a nudge on a few things you can do to level up your crochet piece to give it a little bit more of a high-end look. I know for me, I am very proud of the crochet I do, and I'm so happy and excited when I see other people out and about wearing crochet that they've made. I'm so happy and I'm so proud of them. I just want you to feel as comfortable as you can wearing those pieces. I just want everyone to love the crochet they're wearing. So let's do everything we can to feel good while we're wearing it. Do you have anything you would like to add? I would love for you to put it down in the comments and we can keep this conversation going a little bit further. I will have a video up here if you'd like to watch that next. And as always, thank you so much for being here and talking yarn with me. Bye.